That evening, Rudis Amaryllis begged her father with all her might, with salty tears in her eyes, to spare her. But instead, the lady was faced with a cold wall of alienation, which she did not deserve at all. Emperor Barthold did not even think for a second about feeling sorry for the girl, since he absolutely did not love her. Therefore, in response to all her pleas, he only clicked his tongue in displeasure, which was immediately noticed only by the high priest next to him. In the end, the heroine also realized that all her attempts to beg for her life were futile and only wasted her energy. The empire needed a demonic deity, so Princess Rudis was chosen as an offering. Every second, dozens of people died due to constant attacks of terrible monsters on villages and even cities. Although the princess knew all this, she still had no desire to give her life for the good of her father, who hated her. The man himself once again stated with displeasure that only a member of the imperial family would be suitable for summoning the deity. Only Rudis couldn't understand why her beautiful sister Selena wasn't chosen as an offering in that case. But in reality, everything happened exactly this way, only because the emperor himself did not want to give up his beloved Selena. But he didn't feel sorry for Rudis at all, since she was born from an ordinary commoner, although she was considered a princess. Before the lady had time to object to her father, she suddenly heard a terrible sound behind her, which indicated the beginning of the ritual. The ruler's coldness at this point made even the high priest feel terrified, although none of this concerned him at all. Then, hitting her forehead on the floor and accidentally breaking it, the heroine once again tried to move her father to pity. But instead of sympathizing with his daughter, the man responded by ordering the guards to quickly grab her and throw her into the room. Although the heroine began to shout for her sister to help, even Selena silently turned away from the second princess. And at that moment, Barthold sternly and menacingly confirmed that he wanted to leave Rudis as an offering. As a result, the guards immediately obediently pushed the girl into the dark room where the ritual was to take place. The heroine sincerely did not understand why they were treating her like that, what she was screaming about as soon as the doors slammed shut in front of her. But giving up so easily was not at all in the plans of the second princess, so she began to try to find at least some way out. But at that moment, the high priest began to read a magic spell that was supposed to summon the deity. So literally, in a few seconds, a magic circle appeared on the floor in front of Rudis, although she did not want it at all. As soon as the priest finished reading the ritual, the lady's entire body was pierced by terrible pain, and she could not restrain herself and screamed loudly. Only after a few minutes did Rudis realize that all the pain had somehow gone away, and she looked around in confusion. The princess's hands trembled as she raised them in front of her to reach the stone gates that were closed. Suddenly, the princess felt someone's heavy and gloomy presence behind her, which frightened her greatly. Rudis immediately ordered herself not to turn around under any circumstances, because she absolutely did not want to die right now. Suddenly, she noticed that not far from her on the floor, there was a rather sharp hairpin that had recently fallen from the girl's head. Without thinking twice, the heroine grabbed this thing, which could at least somehow protect her from everything that was happening around her. After which, with all her might, the princess struck the hairpin at the terrible creature that was right behind her. But then Rudis froze, as she met the gaze of a deity who looked terrifyingly dangerous. In complete shock, the lady continued to stand there as her entire body became frozen in incredible fear. All the pain returned to her body, and Amaryllis felt very small compared to this ancient and powerful demon. But no matter how much the princess prayed to this creature this time, nothing worked, and she was still in pain and cold. So, losing consciousness, Miss could only see the outline of some male silhouette, similar to a human one. The girl no longer knew that the god had taken the form of a boy, and carefully took her in his arms, trying to warm her with his weak warmth. At the same time, the ancient demon tenderly kissed the princess, although in theory he should have had no reason to do so. Rudis herself, in her head at that moment, still saw the throne of her father, who had never shown her love in his life. And even in these supposedly last moments of the heroine's life, her father was still strict and cold towards her. Rudis felt the guard's hands grab her roughly again and began to scream for Barthold to change his mind and help her. But the emperor reminded the lady that she was born of a commoner, and the lady realized that no one would save her. For all her 20 years, the heroine lived in constant moral pain because for some reason, no one loved her. Moreover, it so happened that the lady was born with an injured leg, which made her even more despised. Since Rudis herself began to consider herself ugly compared to the first princess, she became very withdrawn and silent. So the girl lived as quietly and modestly as possible, so that no one would bother her or offend her unnecessarily in the imperial palace. But deep down inside, Miss wanted at least someone to give her at least a drop of warm love. However, as a result, the heroine's own father signed a death sentence, and she sincerely could not understand why. Once Rudis even thought that she was paying not for her own sins, but for the sins of a cruel and heartless emperor. And this made the second princess cry even more, because it was very unfair to her. Meanwhile, Amaryllis's daughter also wanted to live, like her older sister, although no one considered her necessary or useful. The girl remembered very vividly her first memory of spring, when she managed to accidentally escape from the room. The sun was shining beautifully then, and the sky was very clear and blue, so the girl remembered this picture for the rest of her life. And now Rudis once again wanted to feel the warm earth and the pleasant spring aromas of plants with her bare feet. The lady thought desperately that she would never live for anyone else again if she could save her own life. Imagine the surprise of the second princess when, after a long sleep, she opened her eyes and was alive. The lady had absolutely no memory of what had happened to her, but she understood that she was clearly not in her own bed. The last memory of the emperor's daughter was a terrible pain throughout her body that would not go away. She remembered very well that she had begun to resist during the sacrifice because she wanted to stay alive. But Miss couldn't understand why, in the end, nothing really happened to her, although it should have been otherwise. While Rudis lay silently on the bed, she suddenly heard people slowly approaching her from behind. They turned out to be maids of noble birth, who usually only helped Princess Celine. The fact that the heroine could sense the entire world with her senses once again convinced her that she had somehow remained alive. But what struck the girl most about this whole situation was that for some reason she was placed in luxurious quarters. Previously, she could not even dream of something like this, because she was not on the same level even with her sister's close assistants. All because, together with Selena, these girls constantly mocked the unlucky and lame second princess. At this point, the lady tried to speak, and realized that her throat was so dry that she could not utter a word. One of the assistants noticed this, and immediately gave the emperor's daughter a glass of water so that she could come to her senses more quickly. After this, Amaryllis really felt better, and she carefully looked around to see where she was. Imagine the lady's surprise when right in front of her, she discovered all those who had previously despised and offended her. But now the main bully Esther suddenly asked how Rudis was feeling and if she needed anyone's help. The second princess immediately remembered with fear how not long ago these maids locked her in a dark closet for a long time. For this reason, the girl did not trust any of the maids and watched their every action with anxiety. Esther noticed that Rudis opened her mouth to say something, so she nodded gently encouragingly. But then, to the maid's great surprise, the princess demanded that all the assistants leave the room. At this moment, the heroine was not joking at all, because she was very afraid to continue being in the company of these ladies. The maids were ordered to help the lady at all costs, so they tried to find out what was going on. But Rudis said that she didn't need any help at all, and that she just wanted to be alone and think for a bit. Out of the corner of her eye, the lady noticed Esther's angry look and thought with fear that she would certainly be hit. But when after a few seconds no blow occurred, Miss cautiously opened her eyes in surprise. Suddenly, the maid said that she regretted her behavior, which made the heroine freeze in place. However, Amaryllis did not believe a single word her offender said, so she asked what she was really trying to achieve. In response, Lady Ivana asked somewhat irritably that she rather did not understand why the princess was behaving this way. Rudis lowered her head in shame, because she herself understood that she had rebelled when she was in Selena's place. Meanwhile, all her life the girl wanted to be in her younger sister's place, even if only for a few seconds. It was only after the ritual that the lady realized that she no longer wanted anything from those around her, so they were disgusting to her. Through her tears, the heroine thought that all her relatives were incredibly disgusting to her for all their actions. And right now, Rudis promised herself that she would never again reach out to those who hated and despised her. Although the princess was born into an imperial family, she understood that she would hardly receive even a legal inheritance. So the elder Amaryllis decided to focus only on herself and once again asked the maids to leave the room. This greatly shocked Esther, who had already thought that she had completely broken the will of the illegitimate girl. However, she was in no hurry to carry out this order, instead freezing right next to the young lady's bed. Ivan's assistant tried to explain to the first princess that she would regret it if she did what she wanted for some reason. But Rudis only thought that these terrible words would have scared her in the past, but now she didn't care. However, compared to the nightmare she saw in the ritual room, these phrases meant absolutely nothing. Therefore, the princess, barely opening her lips, once again asked all her assistants to leave and finally leave her alone. To get the maids to stir, the lady jumped out of bed and declared that otherwise she would leave this room that was alien to her. This had a very good effect, and one of the servants immediately jumped up to the mistress and asked her not to go anywhere. But she accidentally miscalculated her strength and therefore grabbed Rudis by the hand, causing the lady to immediately break free. However, the assistant did not back down and asked the miss to stay in the room, otherwise they would be severely punished. In response, the elder Amaryllis said nothing, since she did not quite understand what exactly these maids were so afraid of. All because Rudis was very surprised, because only one person had the right to punish everyone, but he always remained silent. Before the heroine had time to think about what her father needed, suddenly some strange noise was heard from the door. The first princess stood there uncertainly, and the maids did the same, since no one knew what to do. And at that moment, the second princess Selina burst into her room, who was extremely angry about what was happening. The girl unceremoniously shouted from the doorway for her sister to get out of the bed, which had never belonged to her. The assistants, who were still standing silently near the elder Amaryllis, had to listen to all these bad words. Selina quickly noticed that for some reason, all her words had absolutely no effect on people. Therefore, gritting her teeth and clenching her fists, the emperor's beloved daughter said that she would personally deal with everything. Rudis didn't know exactly what her sister was going to do, so she stood there confused, not wanting to fight. And the second princess grabbed the first one by the edge of her clothes and in an angry voice ordered her to get out of her room. But the heroine once again caught herself thinking that for some reason, she was no longer afraid of everything that was happening. So now she was more sad than scared, because the lady had completely resigned herself to her fate and relaxed. Selina noticed that Rudis, for the first time in his life, continued to sit silently, despite all her threatening and loud words before. But the second princess did not believe that the first could so obviously ignore her, so she smiled in confusion. Finally enraged by her older sister's silence, the younger one couldn't stand it and even raised her hand over her to hit her. But she was immediately stopped by Lady Esther, who could not allow the two princesses to fight among themselves. Selina suddenly remembered how unhappy her father had been with the way the sacrifice ceremony had gone. Even when the girl suggested that the emperor arrange their favorite tea party, he still continued to think about his own. But the worst thing for the princess was that the butler told her that Rudis would now live in the palace with them. At that moment, Selina absolutely did not believe these words and decided that some stupid mistake had simply occurred, until she came across the fact that right now not only her own father was not listening to her, but even her own assistant. In response, the maid explained that she was merely acting on the orders of the emperor, whom she could not disobey. But the second princess was not satisfied with these words, which is why she began to scream only louder because of her anger. No matter how Ivana tried to calm the girl down, she quickly realized that in this situation, it was absolutely useless. Finally, Selina couldn't stand it any longer and theatrically asked how her maid dared to speak to her like that. Rudy silently watched all these disputes from the sidelines, since she was always mentally prepared for something like this. The heroine saw how hurt her younger sister was, but she did not feel pity, because she herself lived in such emotions. Here, Selina suddenly fell to her knees and burst into tears, declaring that she would tell her father everything, who would protect her. The assistants were noticeably frightened by these words, since they could not choose which princess they should listen to now. But then a voice came from the corridor, announcing that His Majesty himself was coming into the room, so everyone got ready. The man walked incredibly calmly, and a very strong and noticeable aristocratic and oppressive aura emanated from him. Stopping in the middle of the room, he looked sullenly at his unloved daughter for now, without saying anything to her. In response, Rudis looked straight into her father's eyes, although she felt great discomfort because of this, because it was unpleasant for her. The second princess noticed the emperor's tension and tried to explain that she urgently needed protection from him. Imagine the girl's surprise when the ruler suddenly asked if she would finally start behaving decently, after which Barthold rather rudely told his beloved daughter that he now did not have time to entertain her as usual. Hearing her father order her to shut her mouth, Selina, with great surprise and fear on her face, fell silent just in case. The emperor immediately noticed the fear on his daughter's face and wearily asked for forgiveness, explaining that he was very tense at the moment. In response, the princess said that she would forgive the ruler, but only this one time, because she was offended. These words were more than enough for His Majesty, so he nodded and looked again at his unloved eldest daughter. Rudis watched the ruler with great concern, as she had no idea what exactly he wanted from her now. She could clearly see from Bartold's eyes how much he despised her, although he never said anything out loud. At this point, the man could not stand it any longer and rudely ordered the girl to immediately get up and silently follow him. Since the princess did not react in any way, the emperor roughly grabbed her by the shoulders and began to shake her, demanding an answer. But the first princess was not at all confused and was not even for a moment frightened by all these threatening actions of her father. On the contrary, it was the emperor who ultimately became uncomfortable because of his daughter's unexpectedly heavy gaze. Never before had a man felt so cold and scared just from looking into someone's eyes. For a moment, Bartold even felt as if all the horror of the abandoned ritual temple was inside Rudis's eyes. But, having carefully examined the girl from head to toe, the ruler was able to remember that she was an ordinary cripple. So the emperor collected his thoughts and shouted loudly once more for the princess to obey him and stand up. But in response, the heroine, unexpectedly for everyone, asked absolutely calmly why she should listen to her father. This unexpected question immediately filled Bartold with anger, although he was not allowed to show it. The lady was not at all surprised by the man's reaction, because for the first time in her life, she refused him any request. However, Miss repeated her question, since she had not heard at least some understandable answer to it. The man's eye began to twitch from such incredible impudence, but he himself still could not stand it, because no one had ever dared to be rude to him. He raised his hand over his unloved daughter because he wanted to hit her hard and thereby teach her respect. But Rudis was not at all afraid this time either, because she knew that the ruler would not dare to take such an action in front of other people. As a result, the emperor actually looked around with his peripheral vision and still lowered his hand raised to strike. The heroine knew that all these assistants had once specifically refused the throne and titles, but were noble. It was for this very reason that Barthold could not disgrace himself in front of such important servants, something that Rudis understood perfectly well. The lady still did not want to follow her father's order, but she understood that otherwise she would not know what was happening. However, when the first princess tried to get up, she immediately experienced the unpleasant pain that always haunted her. The girl immediately guessed that the problem was in her injured leg, which for some reason did not obey. The assistant who was standing closest immediately offered her help, but Miss immediately refused everything possible. So Rudis eventually managed to cope on her own and left the room, where Selena immediately started yelling at everyone. As they slowly approached the main hall, the first princess looked anxiously at the doors leading into it. But the father opened them without the slightest hesitation, which made the girl noticeably surprised and unable to hide her emotions. But what surprised the lady most was that the high priest Bennett was already waiting impatiently inside and was glad to see the miss. Rudis remembered with sadness that this guy was the only one who sincerely worried about her because of the sacrifice. Here the priest, smiling, invited the girl to sit down, explaining that her body was still recovering from the ritual. The emperor also sat down on the sofa and immediately asked if Rudis had really become the one they now really needed. The heroine looked at her father in confusion, whose words Bennett somehow confirmed, although she did not understand anything. Then the ruler declared that the man who appeared after his daughter from the ritual room bore little resemblance to the ancient god. What bothered the man most was that Rudis somehow remained alive, although these deities usually always took the victim. His Majesty could not find any explanation for this phenomenon, which is why he was very worried and nervous. The priest admitted that he himself had doubts about this, but now he is convinced that they did everything right. Bartold only squeezed his hand tightly in response, as he felt anger again, because he wanted to hear completely different words. The priest admitted that the summoned deity had no intention of listening to the emperor's orders, no matter what. This was something that Bartold absolutely did not want to hear, so he almost immediately ordered the priest to simply remain silent. The princess, who was closely observing the situation, thought how strange it all was. Then the ruler asked if it was possible to perform the ceremony again, and this time summon a more obedient deity. To this, the heroine calmly stated that she had no intention of becoming a sacrifice for her father again. In response, the man shouted loudly and angrily at his hated daughter, who for some reason suddenly dared to object to him. But the girl still confidently said that her younger sister Selena was much more suitable for the role of a sacrifice to God. After these words, His Majesty could not restrain himself and hit the emboldened Rudis on the cheek, causing her to fall to the floor. The emperor was sure that the lady had to bow at his feet for permission to live in the palace as a princess. But Miss calmly asked if she should really thank her father for his constant bullying and ridicule. As a result, the man continued to beat the girl, which the priest watched in horror, unable to intervene. Bartold's blows were so strong that soon Rudis began to cough up blood, but he did not stop. The ruler could not understand why his daughter did not obey him, and therefore became angry, becoming like a real demon. The princess herself did not regret her decision at all at that moment. She just did not know why she had not resisted earlier. And Amaryllis, who looked into the lady's eyes, suddenly realized that she was not at all afraid of him, despite everything that was happening. But the emperor was sure that in his life there would be no people who would follow a path that he had not chosen for them. So he grabbed Rudis by the hair and said that she would obey him if she wanted to continue living. But then, unexpectedly for everyone, a male silhouette appeared in the doorway of the room, which was not familiar to the heroine. Moreover, the guy was clearly extremely angry at the people around him, as he reminded them that he had asked to bring Rudis and then wake him up. Since no one dared to answer him, the stranger gloomily flashed his eyes, looking around. Here the emperor and the priest came to their senses, so they bowed politely to the guy, because he was that very ancient deity. The girl was very surprised to see how obedient her father was to this man, who was still unknown to her. Since the lady had a poor memory of everything that happened to her in the ritual room, she did not recognize the demon at all. His Majesty clearly did not expect that the man to whom he bowed would suddenly walk past him in complete silence. Rudis was no less surprised than he was when the deity suddenly, for some reason, slowly approached her. Standing literally less than a meter away from the lady, the guy began to carefully examine her wounds and bruises. The girl didn't know what she should say, so she just froze, her eyes wide open in confusion. Sitting down in front of the princess, the demon asked if she had summoned him, and immediately received an affirmative answer from the priest. Suddenly, the heroine gasped, as she felt an incomprehensible warmth inside herself as this stranger approached. Therefore, Miss, extremely confused, asked him who he was, as she wanted to understand what he felt and why. In response, the guy smiled slightly and asked if the girl really didn't know who he was, or if she simply couldn't remember. But at this moment, the first princess really had no idea who was in front of her. When the stranger said that his name was Lavaine, the lady frowned even more, because she had never heard that name. The man's eyes flashed again, and he thoughtfully realized that the girl really didn't know him, although she could have remembered him. Rudis was very confused by this guy's intense gaze, as she sincerely did not understand what he wanted from her. Then Lavaine couldn't resist, and hinted to the lady that they had seen each other before, which immediately made her think hard. Imagine the heroine's surprise when the stranger confessed that he was the very same deity from the crypt. The princess did not immediately believe these words, but Bennett immediately confirmed them with a nod of his head, so she had no choice. But until the very end, Miss didn't want to believe that such a handsome guy could really be an ancient deity. The demon's huge, terrifying eyes still made Rudy shudder just thinking about them. Such demons lived long before people, and only with the advent of the human race did they begin to be called deities. However, these creatures still required an offering of flesh and blood in order for them to begin fulfilling one's wishes. Lavaine himself asked the question whether the girl found his appearance strange, since he didn't look like a scary demon. But the princess did not want to admit that she was afraid, so she lowered her head and declared that she was completely fine. In response, the god smiled and said that if Rudis was not happy with something, she could always tell him about it personally. For some reason, despite the fact that the demon was smiling very sweetly, the princess froze in place because she did not believe him at all. Meanwhile, the guy slowly reached out to the girl's face and gently tucked a few strands of hair behind her ear. These gentle actions only made the heroine clench her fists even tighter, since no one in her life had ever treated her like that. The princess had absolutely no idea why this creature, which was supposed to kill her, ended up being so kind to her. Lavaine extended his hand to help the girl up, knowing that she was still weak after such a beating. He noticed that the lady was in no hurry to trust him, so he repeated once again that he would never offend her now. From the demon's eyes, one could tell that Rudis had truly become his whole world after she had accidentally summoned him. In the end, the princess decided that she had nothing to lose if she at least tried to trust him. Here the deity touched the girl's cheek again, this time, which she did not expect, but still allowed him. The princess watched the boy carefully, as she was very interested to know what he would do next. Suddenly, the lady's body began to warm up again, but this time it was practically burning, which she could not explain to herself. Looking down in search of an answer, the girl was so surprised that she couldn't even say a word. Even the high priest and the emperor, who had seen a lot in their lives, were ultimately very surprised. The whole point is that the heroine and the demon were connected by a glowing magic circle of the same color, which just became visible. Only after seeing this magic did the lady finally fully believe that this guy really was a real deity. Levane confirmed that now, if Miss were to suffer or the magic circle were to disappear, he would not be able to come to her aid either. The demon explained that if the contract was severed, he would return to his world, which was unpleasant to him. And these words struck the heroine, because she could not even imagine that everything was exactly like this and depended entirely on her. And Levane continued to whisper confidently, putting all his strength into his voice, that the lady was his real savior. As a result, Rudis had no choice but to believe the deity, because he spoke with utmost sincerity. The girl suddenly realized that the guy did not want to return to his world, as much as she did not want to return to her past. So, although the lady was still unsure whether she should trust Levane, she still felt sorry for him and therefore accepted him. Pressing the guy's warm palm to her cheek, the lady thought that he was unlikely to hurt her, which suited her very well right now. The demon noticed that the princess had finally stopped being afraid of him, and he smiled slightly because of this, because her trust was important to him. Here, to the Miss's great surprise, the ancient god gently pulled her hand towards him to help Rudis get to her feet. Although the heroine was afraid to feel pain again, she still stood up hesitantly when she suddenly realized that everything was fine with her. The girl was greatly shocked because she no longer felt pain in any part of her previously beaten body. But here the silence that had hung there due to his impatience was broken by the emperor, who boldly and confidently addressed Levane. But the demon himself did not appreciate this courage, which became almost immediately noticeable from his greatly gloomy face. Because of this, His Majesty, who began to give his speech about helping him, even shuddered in surprise and fell silent. However, Barthold was in dire need of Levane's power, so he bowed to him and asked him to fulfill his request. Rudis didn't expect the priest to immediately explain that the demon would not follow orders from people who weren't part of his summoning. The heroine felt a little awkward realizing this fact, because she absolutely did not want to control a strong god. The emperor, meanwhile, tried to convince the boy that he would do the right thing if he suddenly decided to listen to him. Suddenly, in return, the ancient creature confidently demanded that the ruler transfer all his state powers to him. This demand shocked Amaryllis so much that he even froze in place in confusion and could not move. However, Levane had no intention of making any other demands, as he had no desire to help the impudent emperor. Rudis, who was looking closely at the deity at that moment, could not understand whether one sacrifice was not enough for him. Unexpectedly for everyone, the guy sighed heavily and said that no one had yet understood how exactly the rituals worked after so many years. He looked menacingly at the ruler and asked if he didn't know that a summoned demon obeys its summoner. The first princess listened in surprise to everything that Levane said, who continued to argue with her impudent father. The heroine once again guessed that Barthold, even now, cared about her only for his own benefit. This caused the girl incredible pain, even though she was not so attached to her family. But the lady still found it hard to bear all the emotions she was experiencing at that moment because of the emperor. As soon as Levane noticed the princess's condition, it immediately worried him, as the Miss continued to remain silent. Here, His Majesty finally lost his temper and began to shout loudly at the demon who had recently appeared. Barthold stated with absolute certainty that it was he who had summoned the deity, which meant he should have obeyed him. But all these words were so far from the truth that Levane's face distorted into a terrible and angry grimace. The emperor immediately fell silent, for it was the first time he had felt so afraid of the way someone else was looking at him. Levane had not seen such terrible people for a long time, so he began to use force on the ruler, causing him to grab his head. Rudis froze in place in confusion, but Bennett risked asking if everything was all right with His Majesty. But Barthold didn't explain anything to anyone. He just looked at the guy even more angrily, not understanding what exactly he had managed to do. In response, the demon warned the emperor to never again in his life even try to give him any orders. The ruler was already sitting on his knees, and now he obediently lowered his head as he realized that at that moment he had lost. The heroine was surprised that her father gave in so quickly, because such a phenomenon was happening for the first time. Unexpectedly, bowing low to the demon, the high priest asked permission to at least talk to him a little. Only after receiving permission did Bennett say he was scared enough to listen to every word he said. But the guy couldn't help but say that he really needed the help of a deity, which he was ready to pray for a long time. The thing is that right as a lot had happened. First of all, the lady recalled the words of Lavaine, who told the emperor that he would have to kneel before him. The heroine sadly realized that the demon behaved this way only because he knew how her father and sister had treated her before. However, Rudis didn't know what to do now because she didn't want to use the demon's power, but she herself was weak. The girl sat up on the bed and clearly decided for herself that she was not going to continue to be a puppet in her father's hands. Here, the assistant told the lady that the emperor had come to see her, and the miss allowed him to enter, as she herself wanted to talk. The man appeared in the room in a clearly bad mood, as he squinted his eyes and kept a heavy silence, not wanting to start first. But the princess had already promised herself that she would not retreat at the sight of this man, so she sat calmly. In fact, the ruler did not come to his daughter just like that, because before that, he met one of his servants in the corridor. Barthold was very scared when his assistant reported that something was wrong with Princess Selena. He immediately ran into his daughter's room, where almost all of her close maids had gathered, unable to help their mistress in any way. The emperor noticed that Selene was crying so hard that she did not even stop, and ordered all the servants to leave the room, after which the father himself approached his daughter and kindly asked for forgiveness for having been too strict with her lately. With tears in her eyes, Selena asked the emperor why everything had turned out this way, and now she felt bad. At this moment, the ruler began to think that he had not wanted to perform the ritual so that his daughter would suffer. About 3 years ago, the first monster attack on the empire occurred, which began from the eastern side. As a result, the empire, considered one of the most powerful, began to gradually lose its power and influence. Gritting his teeth in anger, Barthold admitted to himself that he had hoped that his influence would increase after the sacrifice. Here, Selena began to loudly ask what her father would do to ensure that Rudis would not end up unpunished. In response, the man quickly calmed the girl down, saying that he had no intention of giving the eldest princess so much freedom. And Barthold decided to start by deceiving the heroine, hoping that she would fall for it and believe his gentle and pleasant words. But the lady immediately realized that the cunning ruler had simply changed his dialogue tactics, which made her feel a little sad. At this point, Amaryllis coughed nervously and said that he would be glad if the girl agreed to control the deity. But what surprised Miss most was that her father promised to treat her exactly the same way he had treated Selena all this time. Rudis couldn't contain her emotions and jumped up on the spot, slamming her hands on the table in anger because the ruler had crossed the line. But His Majesty himself did not understand how naive he looked from the outside, so he continued to speak confidently. But then, Rudis interrupted him and asked if the emperor had the right to be called a father if he remembered her only now. The heroine herself could not remember the last time she was so determined that she could confidently defend herself. But she knew for sure that she was not doing this because of Lavaine, because even without him, she was tired of enduring ridicule and bullying. The ruler did not expect that his daughter, to whom he showed leniency, would suddenly begin to be so obviously rude to him in response. Rudis, however, absolutely confidently asked the emperor to stop lying to her so brazenly because his words would not deceive her. The ruler immediately thought about how exactly he could attract the lady, since he had a lot of jewelry and money. Rudis actually had 3 conditions for her father, and she wanted him to fulfill them in order to cooperate. But the man himself believed that the princess had no right to make such demands on him. The heroine knew in advance that this man's reaction would be expected, so she was not at all surprised by his rudeness. She explained that if the emperor continued to behave like this, he would leave empty-handed, since the miss would not help him. The girl acted so confidently because she was no longer afraid, and she had 2 whole cards against His Majesty. To begin with, the lady would like to say that Selena was the best sacrifice, but there was no point in that, because the ritual had already taken place. But Rudis's biggest complaint was that she had been treated badly all this time, and then was sacrificed. The lady knew very well that the entire imperial family always tried to avoid any bad gossip about themselves. This is exactly what the heroine was pushing for, hinting that society could stage a coup if it learned the whole truth about the emperor's deeds. The man even dropped his cup of tea on the floor out of anger, because he couldn't even imagine that the girl would threaten him with rumors. Barthold nervously asked what the lady wanted from him, and whether she really thought he would shake with fear because of her arguments. The heroine realized that before, because of such words, he would have definitely hit her, but now he held back because of Lavaine. Glancing at her reflection to make sure she looked serious, Miss declared that her father would no longer be able to manipulate her. Hearing this, the man noticeably darkened, since for him personally all these statements crossed absolutely all possible boundaries. However, the emperor was able to contain his emotions and asked what exactly his unloved daughter wanted from him now. The princess saw how difficult it was for him to say these words, which surprised her because the lady never caused inconvenience. Before speaking, she placed the cup of tea on the table so that the man would not notice the trembling in her hands due to tension. Despite the fact that her father was not in the mood to listen to her calmly now, the heroine still began to talk to him. To begin with, the lady stated that, at her request, the power of the deity would only be used to fight monsters. His Majesty did not like the fact that he would not be able to use the demon to his advantage, but he remained silent for now. But the lady's second condition was much more difficult, since she declared that she wanted to live outside the imperial palace. Rudis had already thought everything through in detail and announced that she would move to the Duchy of Arctus, where they were not against accepting her. The girl still felt as if she was locked in a cage, and therefore she really needed to get out to freedom. In response, the father said in a trembling voice that his daughter was even more ungrateful than he had thought of her all this time. Bartold shouted angrily, reminding the lady that by deciding to leave, she would disgrace her entire family, because bad rumors would spread. But the princess herself didn't care what and who would think of her now, so she didn't answer the emperor. The only thing the heroine explained was that she chose Duke Arctus because he had always been loyal to her father. Miss thought a lot and was sure that this option was the best for her, no matter how difficult it was. The Duchy of Arctus has existed since the creation of the empire and has always served with all its strength to protect it. This wise and experienced family produced good knights every year to continue to protect the imperial family. Rudis was confident that as long as she had the same goal as Arctus, she would be fine, so there was no need to worry. Moreover, the girl was pleased that Selena got along with the future heir of the family, so they shouldn't have touched her either. While still living in the palace, the first princess sometimes heard that the second was constantly trying to please Arctus's son. It was for this reason that Rudis came up with such a plan, and now, having told the ruler everything, she looked at him expectantly. Bartold was noticeably unhappy with the conditions his daughter had set, but he needed the powers of a deity, so he couldn't object. A few minutes later, when her father left, the heroine was left completely alone and thought about what would happen to her after everything. The princess remembered very well how reluctantly the emperor had accepted her conditions, barely restraining himself from gritting his teeth. So now, clenching her fists tightly, the lady was going to manage to do everything she had planned before the ruler changed his mind. Rudis knew she had too little time to do everything, but she tried not to let herself despair about it. However, at that moment, the girl couldn't do anything about the fact that she felt tired, so she closed her eyes for a moment. But at that very moment, the miss completely accidentally fell asleep, and her body slowly began to tilt to the side, falling down. But before the princess could fall to the floor and hit herself, a man's hand carefully caught her and saved her from touching the floor. It turned out to be Levane, who appeared as soon as he realized that Rudis had fallen asleep and now needed help. The boy was thoughtful because he felt sorry for his mistress, who was so tired that she fell asleep. He carefully picked up Rudis in his arms and carried her to the bed so that the lady could get a good night's sleep on the soft mattress. For the girl's greater convenience, the deity even tucked her hair behind her ear so that it would not tickle the princess's face. Finally, he whispered that the lady had done a good job and quietly disappeared back into the space where he now lived. But Rudis had no idea what was going on around her, as she was fast asleep and only slightly twitching her fingers due to her dreams. It so happened that the heroine was now dreaming of an alarming moment about how she was for some reason completely covered in blood. Then Levane appeared in front of the lady, also heavily stained with blood, although he behaved absolutely calmly. With his eyes flashing, the boy demanded that his summoner tell him what exactly she wanted. But Rudis, sitting completely in blood, could not formulate her order because it was too cruel. But when the lady woke up the next morning, she did not remember anything at all of what she had seen in her dreams that night. What Miss was most worried about was that she woke up too late, as she was very tired and had not rested lately. The priest explained that he did not wake the girl on purpose, as Bennett said that she needed to get as much sleep as possible. In response, Rudis thanked the old man and asked, somewhat awkwardly, if she could walk around the temple alone. No one stopped the princess, so she went to explore the surrounding areas as quickly as possible. The priest finally said that the priest had asked to provide the princess with everything she needed, so they obeyed. Rudis was grateful to her friend for such help, as she really needed to collect her thoughts. Here the heroine suddenly heard someone calling her, which greatly surprised the girl because this voice was in her head. Almost immediately, Rudis recognized that it was Levane trying to contact her, but she was still very shocked by it. She looked uncertainly in the direction from which the guy was calling her, and he immediately asked the girl to come to him as soon as possible. Without thinking twice, the princess decided to find him, although she had very poor orientation in this garden near the Temple of Priests. When the heroine finally found the deity, she was so surprised that she opened her eyes wide, no longer monitoring her emotions. Levane stood right in front of the huge tree, not moving at all despite the cold that reigned around him. Hearing the steps of the girl who called him, the guy turned around and smiled kindly at her, asking if the lady had rested enough. Rudis froze in place, not knowing what to say, when suddenly the demon himself explained that he knew about her father's arrival and demands. This heroine felt awkward because she didn't understand why Levane was so caring towards her for some reason. The demon noticed the lady's confusion and asked directly if she didn't trust him because he was so obviously trying to help with everything. Since the guy hit the nail on the head, the princess couldn't say anything in response. She only shrank even more tightly from the outside. Then the deity whispered with his lips that he did not dare to do something himself, only because the lady did not give him instructions. These words greatly surprised the heroine because she did not know that a clear formulation of her desires was so important to the assistant. The girl honestly admitted that she was worried about the guy's possible methods if she gave him a clear order. But Levane immediately said that the princess did not need to be afraid or complicate anything, because in fact, everything was quite simple. The demon waved his hand thoughtfully, asking the mist to come closer to him, which she eventually obediently did. As Rudis slowly and reluctantly approached, the demon suddenly asked her to name her favorite season. This question surprised the princess, but she did not consider it dangerous, so she answered with confusion that she liked spring the most. In response, Levane smiled and admitted that that was exactly what he thought, although it was unclear why he needed this information. The heroine watched the demon carefully, as she did not understand what exactly he was planning to do for her now. Imagine the girl's surprise when the tree suddenly blossomed very beautifully, as if spring had arrived all around. The deity, however, explained quite calmly that changing age was one of the easiest abilities for him. The guy took one of the leaves of the transformed tree and, as proof, completely dried it out, causing it to age. The lady did not know whether she was pleased with such beauty, which could only be achieved by aging the tree for a whole cycle. However, Miss was interested in this ability, so she asked to tell her more about it. And Levane said that he could control the age of any object or creature, as long as it was within the limits of his powers. Such power noticeably amazed the princess, because it could easily cause a huge amount of damage to any object at all. As if reading Rudis's mind, the demon explained that he, too, had limits in using these abilities. But the heroine still could not get rid of the thought that not only the emperor, but the entire empire would desire such power. But the demon distracted the lady from her heavy thoughts, as he asked her to tell him what she really wanted. Here, the miss noticed that at the same time as these words, a magic circle appeared on her neck, reminding her of their connection. Without thinking twice, Rudis declared that she wanted the deity to save her entire state from the monsters, of which there were already a great many. In response, the guy said, upset, that this wish was too abstract, and it was not clear from his face whether he would fulfill it. Rudis tried to explain that this was exactly what she wanted, but the demon asked the girl not to lie to herself. Levane was convinced that the lady decided to save people from monsters because of social pressure to do so. But the heroine did not understand why the desire to act for the people could not in fact be her true request. The lady listened with her mouth slightly open to the explanations of the assistant, who explained that she could wish for anything. The guy's face noticeably darkened when the girl suddenly admitted that she didn't know exactly what she really wanted. Rudy suddenly couldn't stand it and screamed loudly that she had never wanted anything for herself, so it was difficult for her to choose something. The heroine spent her entire life imprisoned in the palace, so she had no right to say what she wanted. This is exactly what she told the demon now, who persistently demanded that she come up with at least some kind of wish for him. But the demon reacted quite calmly to such sad words of the lady and asked her to give the order when she decided. The princess did not quite understand why the deity was reminding her that time was short, since she did not know all the details. Here the miss finally remembered that because of her difficult life, she wanted to leave the palace, which she told her assistant. But for some reason, he once again said that this could not be his mistress's true desire, so she should think about it. The guy started asking the lady questions one after another about what she would do after she received her long-awaited freedom. But the princess could not answer anything, since she had not yet had time to think about what exactly she would do next. A memory suddenly appeared in her head, in which someone close spoke about how they should be free. But the heroine herself could not remember more specifically who and when said these words to her, although she tried very hard to do so. Rudy's finally admitted that she didn't really know anything yet, but she just wanted to be free. Suddenly, Levane responded with a smile and said that this was all he wanted to hear from the lady for now. The girl did not expect that the guy would suddenly kindly ask her to relax, because she still did not believe in his sincere concern. But then, Levane tenderly kissed the lady on the forehead, saying that he had been waiting for many years for the opportunity to come into this world and fulfill her wish. Blushing slightly, the mist turned away, reminding the deity not to forget about killing monsters. With a quiet sigh, the demon nodded and said that he understood that this was also the lady's wish, so he would definitely fulfill it. Rudis wasn't quite sure why Levane said that phrase with a sad tone, but she didn't dare ask for more details. But most of all, the heroine was surprised that the guy admitted that she would have to be with him during the battle with the monsters. However, Levane reassured the lady by telling her that she had nothing to worry about, as he could do absolutely everything himself. Here the demon himself had to be surprised, since the lady suddenly said that she was not worried at all because of her presence on the battlefield. The princess was worried that if she left the palace with her status, there would be even more chaos around. Levane didn't expect that the lady would suddenly become so concerned about people who didn't think about her at all. Rudis understood perfectly well that no one could survive alone, so she was worried about the others. The girl said that she would soon ask the temple for help, but for now she did not need the services of the deity summoned from chaos. Levane nodded in agreement and asked the lady to call him if she needed anything from him, after which he disappeared. The next morning, the second princess named Selena arrived very early in the Duchy of Arctus for an important dialogue. But an hour later, the butler approached the girl and said that the duke was busy, so she should return home. The lady clenched her fists in anger, as she was very unhappy with everything that had happened, although she could not influence it. Selena would never have thought that anyone would make her wait for an entire hour and not come. The emperor's daughter sincerely did not understand how the duke dared to treat her in such a way and not come out to meet her. Although the princess did not see the guy very often, he had never shown such disrespect towards her before. Selena smiled wryly from resentment and thought that now conversations about marriage would be much more problematic. Suddenly, the lady was informed that her friend had finally arrived, and she immediately jumped up to finally meet him as soon as possible. But the son of Duke Arctus, named Seriphus, was clearly not happy to meet the emperor's daughter at that moment. However, the princess was not upset at all by this, and only asked the guy why he had been walking somewhere for so long. Imagine the girl's surprise when the guy suddenly said that today he wouldn't be able to spare time for conversation with her. He explained that he had come only to say goodbye, as the servants had conveyed that the lady was still waiting to meet him. In fact, the guy was so angry that he could barely calmly say that he was upset to find out how his feelings were being played with. But Selena did not understand why the duke's son spoke so irritably, because she had no intention of lying to him about anything. But Seriphus had no intention of listening to the girl, as he turned around and went off to do his own thing. The emperor's daughter didn't like the fact that the man she liked turned his back on her, so she started screaming. In response, the guy said that he had an important message from the high priest, so he was now heading there. At that moment, Bennett was talking to Rudis, and was very surprised by what she had asked him so unexpectedly for some reason. The fact is that the lady once again reminded that she would like to be under the patronage of the Arctus, which she told her friend. But the priest knew that the duke had already agreed to everything long ago, so he was confused when the mist began to worry about this again. The heroine heard that initially old man Arctus was not very keen on cooperating, and she fully expected this option. Here the priest said that the man had sent his son to meet the lady, who would arrive to them very soon. The guy asked if the lady knew anything about Sir Seriphus, as he was genuinely curious if they could talk. But the princess admitted that she only heard that he sometimes came to the palace and contacted her sister. In response, Bennett reassured the girl, saying that it was normal for the heir of Arctus to appear in the palace. But Rudy still doubted that she could completely trust Seriphus, when suddenly the servants reported that he had arrived at the temple. The guy immediately began to communicate quite politely with the priests, even though he was not allowed directly to the princess. However, they did not detain the duke's son for long, and therefore took him to the chambers where the lady was now located. When she saw the guy, the girl froze in place, because she realized that he was handsome, but she was still able to introduce herself to him. The heroine really hoped that the slight tremor in her voice due to excitement was not noticeable, since she did not want to show emotions at all. But then Seriphus himself asked for forgiveness for not introducing himself immediately, as this showed his bad manners. He came closer to the lady and kissed her hand, informing her that he had come on his father's orders to help the miss in everything. For some reason, the heroine felt some strange warmth when Arctus carefully touched her hand with his lips. Moreover, at that moment, the princess's heartbeat sharply increased, for which she could find no explanation. Here, behind them, Rudis noticed a familiar silhouette, whose presence so close to her had frightened her quite a bit. It turned out that Selena was hiding behind the ledge of the wall for some reason, and was clearly shaking with anger because of what was happening. Rudis was very surprised by this, as she did not know that her sister was in the temple, since she was supposed to be in the palace. Fear pierced the heroine, as she guessed that Selena was following her lover, although she did not approach him. The first princess did not expect that the relationship between the duke's son and the emperor's second daughter would be different from the rumors. But right now, the lady wasn't sure of anything, so she didn't jump to any conclusions about her sister. At this moment, the heir of Arctus announced that he had prepared a place for the miss, so that she could already move towards them. Hearing this, the heroine froze in place with delight, as she could finally escape from her cruel father. Because of these thoughts, the girl did not answer the guy's questions for some time, as she was thinking very hard about the future. Seriphus himself understood perfectly well what relief the lady must now be experiencing, running away from her father. Here the miss asked when exactly she could move, and the duke's son allowed her to do so right now. To this, Rudis immediately responded with consent, because she really wanted to leave the emperor's domain as quickly as possible. The speed with which the princess made decisions made it clear to Seriphus once again how important it was for her to leave as soon as possible. Therefore, he announced that at that very moment, he would give orders to start collecting the princess's things. Although Rudis should have been happy about what was happening, she was still too worried to smile freely. Literally a few hours later, everything was ready for departure, but the princess still could not calm herself down. She looked back and once again noticed her sister nearby, who was watching her for some reason. The heroine sincerely did not understand why the second princess simply watched her actions and did not throw a terrible tantrum. Since the lady needed to get to the duchy before her sister did anything, she quickly got into the carriage. Already sitting inside the carriage, Rudis allowed herself to carefully look out, as this was the first time she left the palace. Imagine the girl's surprise when she saw completely different views with people around, going about their business. Only now did the heroine finally understand that this was what the freedom she was eventually able to obtain looked like. Soon, Seriphus came to the lady and announced that they had arrived, after which he offered her his hand for a safe descent down. The girl gratefully accepted the help, as she had problems with her leg, which made it difficult to get out of the carriage. Here, the heroine saw in front of her a huge castle, which was the Duchy of Arctus, which she was noticeably amazed by. Distracted by the building, the lady lost control of her injured leg, and it slipped off the step of the priest's carriage. But the duke's son immediately reacted and caught the princess, deciding that she had fallen completely by accident and not tripped. As soon as the younger Arctus touched the lady's body, a magic circle immediately flared up around her neck for some reason. For this reason, the girl pulled her hand out of the guy's hands as quickly as possible, although from the outside it looked a little rude. Seriphus immediately noticed that something had gone wrong and asked for forgiveness, although Miss said that everything was fine. But before Rudis had time to leave the duke's son, he suddenly called out to her, which frightened the princess terribly because of her lame leg. With bad thoughts about the guy noticing her condition, she turned to Sir, since there was no other way out anyway. The lady was very surprised when the guy told the servants that he would personally take her there, although the assistants were supposed to take her there. However, Seriphus insisted incredibly strongly on his offer to help, as he believed that the girl was already tired. The princess had no reason to refuse him, so although still feeling uneasy, the lady agreed. The whole time they were walking along the corridors, the guy seemed to be in no hurry, and Rudis's leg felt comfortable. When the duke's son brought the heroine to her room, she was amazed by the incredible luxury of this stunning place. Rudis immediately admitted that this place was so good that she did not even want any other one for her now. Suddenly, instead of leaving, Seriphus for some reason dropped to one knee in front of the lady and bowed politely to her. The heroine did not expect that the guy would suddenly ask permission to look at the bruise on her leg, which had been a limp since birth. As unpleasant as it was for the lady, she knew she didn't want to lie to her new friend, so she decided to tell him about her leg. This time, it was the turn of the duke's son to be surprised that the miss reported that she was limping not because of a bruise or wound. And Rudis herself suddenly announced, quite calmly, that her injury could not be cured, since it had been there since birth. It was very difficult for the princess to talk about something like this, but she tried to overcome her own fears. Almost every morning, the heroine woke up in a cold sweat because her leg was numb, praying that it would finally get better. But after so much time, nothing had changed, so the lady told Seraphis that there was no way she could be helped. Sir did not give up and offered the help of priests, but Rudis was sure that even these skilled people would not be able to help her in any way. Only now did the boy realize that the emperor had not helped his daughter at the time, and because of this, her condition had worsened considerably. This made the guy so angry that he said that he shouldn't have given up even without trying anything. The princess was surprised that a stranger suddenly became so concerned about her problem. However, the lady did not believe in miracles, so she barely audibly whispered that she had no choice all this time anyway. The heir of Arctus noticed that the miss became sad, so he apologized for putting too much pressure on her right now. The guy did not call a doctor, since the princess did not want it, but asked permission to try to heal her himself. The girl didn't know what to say in response to this proposal, since she still wasn't sure that it would work. But then, Seraphis asked if he could place his hands on the lady's leg to begin the healing, as he had studied healing magic. At that moment, Miss remembered the guy's recent words about how she shouldn't give up without even trying anything. Collecting her thoughts, Rudis agreed that they should try to do everything they could now. Sir noticed that the princess agreed to his proposal, so he asked her to close her eyes and get ready. Very carefully, he touched the lady's once injured leg in the hope that he could help at least a little. The heroine involuntarily shuddered as soon as she felt such an unusual touch from another person. At that moment, Duke Arctus's son realized that the girl's leg was actually even worse than he had originally thought. However, Sir wasn't going to give in so easily, so he squeezed her leg a little tighter, using even more of his strength. But then the princess couldn't hold back and screamed, which surprised the guy, since before that, she had said that she didn't feel any pain at all. When Seraphis looked at Rudis, he saw something he had never seen before, anywhere, so he froze in amazement. For some reason, a magic circle appeared on the lady's body, and she herself became unbearably hot from Seraphis' touch. The heir of Arctus didn't even know what to do in such a situation, since he had never encountered anything like this before. He quickly removed his hands from the lady's leg, and Rudis immediately breathed a sigh of relief as she instantly felt better. However, Seraphis could not restrain himself and asked the princess how this complex magic circle ended up on her. But Rudis couldn't tell anything specific, since all she knew about the circle was that it appeared immediately after the ritual. The guy concluded that in this case, the girl's treatment would have to be postponed for some time, since the circle would catch fire. The lady said nothing in response to Sir's words, that the temple would definitely find the reason if the circle appeared after the ritual. At this point, Arctus said that it would be better for the mist to rest, and in the meantime, he would ask the servants to prepare a tasty and filling meal for her. Here, Rudis became emotional, and thanked the Duke's family for accepting her despite all the possible difficulties. The boy was noticeably surprised by these words, as it was the first time someone from the imperial family had thanked him. But he did not show his emotions, but instead asked the girl to rest and quickly left her current room. Seraphis knew that his father was currently at war with the emperor, but because of the monsters around them, they did not declare war on each other. And the only way to defeat the monsters now was to ask Rudis to summon a deity that possessed enormous powers. The boy felt sorry for the princess, who had no self-respect at all because of the way her cruel father and sister treated her. He couldn't help but clench his fist in anger, freezing in the corridor, as he didn't understand how anyone could treat their own daughter like that. Here, Seraphis noticed an assistant in the corridor and ordered him to bring the lady tasty food and comfortable clothes as soon as possible. The servant nodded obediently in response, remembering all the instructions, since he understood how important this guest was for the duchy. At this moment, in the imperial palace, one of the aristocratic maids was talking with her friend, sighing heavily. Lady Esther, who believed that she would definitely not be able to keep up with the princesses, casually discussed the latest gossip with her. The assistant suggested that so much had changed in the palace precisely because of the summoning of the deity. Ivana was noticeably surprised when her friend asked if the summoned demon seemed a little strange to her. The girl said that there were rumors among the maids that this god only obeyed Rudis and was an inferior being. But what surprised the lady most was that it was Princess Selena who was spreading these gossips, telling almost everyone around her. This was because the emperor's first daughter was still alive, despite the ritual having been performed and the demon having come into this world. Esther did not show her emotions in any way, although she listened very carefully to all this information because it was useful to her. However, the head maid couldn't help but grin as she didn't expect Selena to be so stupid. That same evening, Esther's faithful assistant anxiously asked her what her mistress was going to do next. In response to the girl, the lady said that the main problem was not with the princesses at all, but with the ancient deity. Giselle was surprised by this fact, as she had heard many people calling the summoned demon just a fake. However, unlike everyone else, the maid was absolutely certain that the god was real, so she touched the important paper on the table and said that they must not cross Louvain under any circumstances. This paper was a letter from Esther's father, who strongly asked the girl not to interfere with the summoned demon in any way. Lady Ivana knew that her father and the temple had had extremely good relations with each other for a very long time. As a sign of great friendship, the priests once handed over to Ivan's duchy an important document that they kept safe. This book was called Alpha, and it contained rare information about the deities that could be summoned. Although Esther had never read this family heirloom before, she was sure that she would find a lot of useful information in it. The maid hoped that the book would also contain at least something about